Hello everybody, if you're watching this video you are interested in finding out how to titrate, and so we're going to start out with the most important part of our preparation, and that is to clean our glassware. If you are doing the titration competition, you'll also have two pieces of paper that you've been handed out. The first one is the instructions on how to go about doing the titration, and the second page is for your calculations to determine your unknown. Let's start out by doing what you need to do with your glassware. This is the burette, and you can see that our burettes will measure 50 mils. It's on a retort stand with a burette clamp, and you just need to press on the lever to open it, and the spring will close it back up for you and hold the burette in position. At the moment the valve is closed because you can see the handle is horizontal, and to open the valve I will just rotate it through 90 degrees, and the valve, when the valve handles are parallel with the burette, then the valve is open. Some other things that I have here: for funnel for filling my burette. On the retort stand I've got a white tile, and the white tile will help me see the colour changes that occur when I'm reaching my end point. I have a couple of beakers and 4 conical flasks. I also have a volumetric flask, and for the titration competition, a 100 ml volumetric flask. For other titrations that we do in physical sciences, then you'll probably be using a 250 ml volumetric flask, but the size doesn't matter. What we do is going to be the same. And here we've got some solutions. So some sodium hydroxide solution is what I need for the titration competition. For physical sciences, that you might be titrating with hydrochloric acid. I'm not going to be using that today, so I'll put that to one side. I also need indicator, and you can see here that it's a phenolphthalein indicator that we'll be using, and have a wash bottle here for washing. All of our washing is done using deionized or distilled water, and when we're using these, we want to make sure that we don't contaminate the tip of the outlet here, and so we're not touching it on everything. We want to just squirt from the bottle without touching the end of the tip onto our glassware. Our other important piece of glassware is our pipette, and you can see here that it's quite a narrow neck here that comes down to a fine point, and this is the end that we fill it up to. There's only one volume that our pipette can measure, and there's an etched line up here near the top of the pipette that tells us exactly, in this case, 20 mils, because this is a 20 mil pipette. And here is a pipette filler. Now I've got all of my glassware together that I can start the cleaning process. When I clean my volumetric flask, I'm just going to rinse it off. As I said, be careful that you're not touching the end of the wash bottle onto anything. Rinsing right around so that you are squirting the water directly into the top. You don't want to fill your glassware up too much. You just want a small-ish amount in your glassware so that you can agitate it and clean it out. 3 times for each of your washings. So now I know that my volumetric flask is clean. I'm going to rinse out the beaker. Again, I'm rinsing this one 3 times. Now rinsing conical flasks right up from the neck, wetting the whole inside surface, and again 3 lots. You can see that there isn't that much in there, but I need to make sure I agitate it right up around the edges. Now I'm up to cleaning my burette, and my wash bottle's nearly empty, so I'm going to grab another wash bottle that's got more deionized water in it, or actually I might fill this one up. Okay, it's going to be easiest to wash my burette by taking it out of the clamp here. I've got the valve closed, so when I put water in, it's not all going to spill on the floor. I'm just going to put in about 15-20 mils or so. The important way to rinse the burette is to put your thumb over the end and you rotate and rock it. Same with our burette as our other glassware. We're going to do this 3 times. And I'm just going to, because I can, I'm emptying it straight into the sink. If you're pressed for room, you might empty it into a waste beaker. I'm going to rinse the funnel as well. My last piece of glassware to clean is my pipette. And I can do this by clean beaker we might use. This one over here, I can put some deionized water into the beaker. And I'm going, because this is a 20 ml pipette, I'm going to need at least 20 mils in my beaker. And now I'm going to use my pipette filler to fill up the pipette. I'm squeezing just below the bulb. Okay, so if I squeeze on here and squeeze on the bulb at the same time, I can empty the air out of the bulb. Place it on the pipette. Just push it on gently. You don't want to ram it on really hard. It's easy to break the neck of the pipette. And then sit it in to your solution and squeeze that little spot below the bulb, and it will then draw the solution, or in this case just the water, up into the pipette. Now because I'm cleaning it, I'm just going to quickly take the pipette off and put my thumb over the end so that I don't lose all of the water out of the end. And it's the same sort of rocking and rotating action as I used for the burette. I'm going to release my thumb a couple of times just to make sure I've got solution going right down the whole inside surface of the pipette. And like before, we're going to do this 3 times. Now I've just got a bit of paper towel. I'm going to use the paper towel to remove the last bit of water out of the end of the burette and to wipe off excess water from my funnel and to remove that last little bit of water out of the end of the pipette. Now all my glassware is clean. I'm ready to start preparing for the titration. For the titration competition, you're going to start out with a sample that has a known mass, and it will have a serial number that starts with S. If you look at your titration competition entry sheet, you'll have a spot here for your name, school or college. Well, that's going to be Hellier College. Your year is going to be year 11 or 12. Your team number will be a number that I tell you. And there's a spot here for you to put the names of your other team members because it's a competition where there's 3 people per team. You can see here where it says the standard sample ID number. That's where you put your ID number for the sample, the one that starts with S. So my one here is number 046, and I'll write that down in that spot there. There's also a spot for you to write down the volume of your volumetric flask. I have a 100 ml volumetric flask, and so I'm going to write down 100 mils in that spot there. There's a spot for you to write down the volume of your pipette. I've got a 20 ml pipette. It's written on here, 20 mils, and so I'm going to write down 20 mils for my pipette. There's also a spot in that same location for the mass of your sample, and that's the number that's written there along with the code. So mine says 0.401 grams. You can see that that's what I have included now on my entry form. There's a little calculation to do later, but what I want to do now is go back to the instructions on the blue sheet here. It says carefully examine the samples provided, so we're just looking at 1. Is there any signs of damage? No, it all seems fine. And you need to be able to clearly read the numbers that are written on here, and I could do that. So that's step 2. Step 3 is to write your name and other details on the result sheet, which I've done. Now we're up to making up our solution. Open the standard vial and tip the contents into a beaker. It's one of our clean beakers that we've washed up over here. So I'm going to open it up and tip it in like that. I'm going to rinse out the container with my deionized water just to make sure I've got all of my sample, and so that I can transfer it all to the beaker. If you're shaking your sample container, make sure the lid is on. Now, because I'm only using a 100 ml volumetric flask, you get to 100 ml pretty quickly. It takes a little bit of effort to dissolve the KHP for the titration competition. I'm going to need a stirring rod. So, just like everything else, I'm going to give it a rinse off, make sure it's clean. The stirring rod will mean that you can crush up any of those harder lumps. Now, I think I've dissolved all of my KHP. I'm going to carefully pour it into my volumetric flask. I'm going to do it holding on to the stirring rod with my finger here so that it doesn't fall out. And now I need to rinse all of my KHP off the stirring rod and the inside of my beaker. So I'm going to be rinsing about 3 times. Okay, so I think I've rinsed them off really well and transferred all of my KHP. I'm going to put my stopper in. I know it's not full, but I'm going to put my stopper in and give it a shake, try and make sure that I've dissolved all of my KHP. And I get a better shaking and mixing action if it's not full. So now, make sure I don't lose any of my solution from my stopper. Transfer that in as well, rinse down, and the last part, the important part, is to make it up to the bottom of the etched line on the volumetric flask. You need to make sure that you are looking straight on so that you don't have a parallax error, and try not to overshoot the mark. Do the last bit of your filling really slowly, because you'll find that some of the water takes a little bit of time to run down the inside edge. Now, there is my solution of my KHP. That solution is going to go into my 4 conical flasks, and I'm going to need to dry out the beaker. Okay, because I don't want to dilute my solution. I want to make sure that I get the correct number of moles of my KHP into each of my conical flasks. And so if I don't dry out my beaker, then I'm going to be diluting my solution. Remember how we rinsed out our burette? Well, we don't want to dilute our solution from our burette either. Sorry, our pipette. So we need to make sure that we give this a rinse with our KHP as well. Now, I've thoroughly mixed this. I mixed it up in the beaker and I gave it a good shake before, and now I'm making sure that all of my ions are evenly distributed throughout my solution by giving it a good mix up. I only want to use some of my solution for rinsing. So I'm just going to sit that there, and we're going to refill our pipette with a small amount of our solution. Okay, and use that same rocking technique to rinse it. Now, this time it's not the deionized water, this time now it's the KHP. And you don't want to over rinse if you like. You want to make sure that you've got enough solution to be able to perform all of your titrations. So we're just trying to be frugal. Last one, and you might find, as I've been finding, that to get that last little bit out of the beaker, you might need to just hold it on its edge a bit. Don't lean the bottom of the pipette into the bottom of the beaker, because otherwise it will prevent the liquid from actually coming up. So our pipette has now been rinsed out with the KHP solution, and we can now go ahead and put 20 mils of KHP into each of our conical flasks. Be careful not to draw any of your liquid up into the pipette filler, because that is very bad for it, and then you've contaminated it with a solution, and they're a little bit awkward to clean. Same deal now, where there's only the one fill line for our pipette, and we need to make sure we don't have parallax error, so you'll need to have it at eye level until it is exactly on the mark. Once it is, you can then make sure you don't have any drips on the bottom of the pipette. Take it over to one of your conical flasks, remove the pipette filler, and then allow it to run into your conical flask. Hold the pipette up against the side of your conical flask until no more of your solution comes out, so that it's nice and still there. It's designed to have that last little bit of liquid remain in the end. So that has been fully transferred, and now we're going to repeat for the other conical flasks. So the little spot labelled S is a filling spot, and if you overfill, and that's the easiest way to get the correct level in your pipette, then you can release the excess by squeezing on the letter E until your bottom of your meniscus is on your line. If you re-squeeze your pipette filler each time, you won't have the same issue as I have, where I've sometimes run out of suction before I filled my pipette. I've got a bit of an air bubble there. There we go. So I've got rid of the air bubble, but I've got enough solution. There we go. So I fixed up the air bubble, and now I can run out my excess. If you look in the beaker, there's nearly no solution yet left. I've used it all with my rinsing and my 20 mils in each of my conical flasks. Right, I'm going to put some indicator in each of these. Common problem is students forgetting the indicator, so about 3 drops in each. No colour change. Now I'm up to preparing my burette, and I'm going to use my dried out funnel to put in some sodium hydroxide solution. And I'm going to move the burette down just to make it easier to fill. I have to do the rinsing, so I'm going to be filling it to around about the 37-ish mil mark. Take it out of the clamp, and just like you rinsed it with water, we're going to be rinsing it with the sodium hydroxide by rocking it backwards and forwards and rotating, and then down to drain. That really was a bit too much for a rinse. You don't rinse as well with a lot of solution. You rinse better with a smaller amount of solution. So we're really aiming for about 10 to 15 mils. So I'm going to try, I might have a bit more control if I just put the funnel in while I hold the burette and support the funnel. That's better. Rinsing again. I can feel the sodium hydroxide on my hands. It has an oily feel. You can always wear gloves. So make sure your valve is closed, because this time when we're filling it up with our sodium hydroxide solution, we're going to be using this to titrate. Now, it's not a good idea to reach so far above your head, so let's move it down to a safer level. Lift up the funnel so that it doesn't cause an airlock. Fill it up past the zero. Take out your funnel. And I'm just going to sit my waste beaker under here again and move the burette down a bit so that I can clearly see where my zero is, and I'm going to empty out the burette to the zero line and knock that last little bit of drip off the outside of the bottom of the burette there. Now I'm ready to start titrating.